Hi everyone, it's Adam with Mindless Restoration, and today I've got a set of French provincial nightstands, and the first installment of what I hope to be doing is a new series of videos. My old videos have pretty much been all furniture flips, and this one is actually client jobs. So these painting talks, I hope to kind of cover a lot of different topics in painting, particularly relating to furniture. Some are going to be at a screen, me voiceovering and talking about new technology and new types of paints, and then some are going to be like this, where I'm on site, or like this one actually in my house, but doing a job for a client. And so here, I've got a set of French provincial nightstands that were painted previously by someone else with a lacquer. The first step whenever you get something like this is like, the first questions I ask are, okay, well, why do you want to repaint it? They said they just were limited on color choices, and they really wanted to go with more of a white, but they just didn't really have one. And so I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. I kind of talked to them about the different types of paints and things like that. And then I try to get as much information about the previous coating as I can. Because when you're starting to paint a recently painted or new piece that you don't know what the coating is, it can be kind of difficult to determine what needs to be done. So in this case, I know the process that was done for these. It was Mohawk lacquer coatings, and it was adhered very well, and it was a solvent-based coating. So, that kind of adds an extra step to me, because I'm not using Mohawk lacquers to go back over this. I'm going to use a water-based color. And a lot of the lacquers do finish a lot better than most paints, but the thing is that for the marginal advantage, you're very limited on color. So that's kind of one thing that I don't really like about the lacquers. Just here, there's really nobody that can mix them. So what I kind of said was, okay, you just bought them recently, so the lacquer probably hasn't cured. Give it a couple weeks, 2 to 3, and then call me back. And so that's what we did. I gave it to cure, and then she called me back. I got color, all that, and I started on the job. I started by degreasing them, obviously, and then I sanded everything with a surf prep sander, as I normally would. I used a little bit finer grit just because I have got some like 280 grit to like 220 grit now, and then I wiped it off really good. So you'll notice in this video that I was using, unlike my other ones, instead of just kind of blowing it off, I used a cloth that was blue. That way I could see the color of the dust and how much dust was on it. So, other than that, really, I'm just spraying BIN primer. Like I said, I determined the previous coating was a solvent. It's just a regular oil-based lacquer. So really there, you're kind of left with two options. If you're going to go back with the same coating, then you can go back with the same coating or another oil-based coating, and you don't need to prime it. But if you're using a different coating, then you need to bridge it with something like a shellac-based primer. Now, I'm obviously kind of just joking here, but shellac will stick to a bar soap almost. I mean, really, there's not much that a shellac-based primer will not stick to, except for something like wax. So nothing's going to stick to wax. And that's a pretty common concern that you're going to have when you're painting furniture. And it's something to really watch out for. Every time I get a piece, I always look at it, and I'll take my fingernail or something, or a coin, and I'll kind of scratch at it to see what's on there. And if I feel any kind of like waxy like substance, it's almost going to be a job that you don't want to do. It's just really a lot of work, and it's going to be really difficult to get that wax off of it. It's a mess. You really need to use either an inane amount of sandpaper or a lot of mineral spirits, and it's kind of a messy job. This did not feel like it had wax on it, although I tried to sand it a lot to make sure that even if there was, then I got it off. And I ended up actually wiping it off with mineral spirits before I started, just to make sure, to try to see if there was any wax on it. I really wasn't coming up with anything, so I kind of just figured that it was just the lacquer. So I'm using a cap spray here, 115, and I've got a numbers 4 tip on it, and that would probably be somewhere around a 1.5 if you're using a traditional setup. So some common scenarios you might get into, and also scenarios that I've gotten into, if you don't know what you're painting, it's important to just use a primer like shellac that is very, very adherent in almost all circumstances. You know, it'll stick to just about anything that you can think of. So, you know, if you got something out of a factory, IKEA, something like that, you know, a BIN primer would be a good choice. If you know what coating it is, then you have more options, obviously. If you're going over a water-based coating, and obviously most top coats that people use nowadays, as far as paints go especially, are water-based, you have a little bit easier job ahead of you, assuming that they painted it correctly. You can usually just go straight to painting. You don't necessarily need to prime. You know, most of the things that I prime, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to have the chance of an incompatibility with it. But if I didn't have that and I knew what I was going over, I'd skip priming because, you know, I'm all for skipping unnecessary steps if you can. So we're just sanding the primer here. We're going to use the Benjamin Moore Command in satin, and it's Swiss coffee color, so it's going to be like a whitish color. It looks very good. We thinned it by about 5 to 10%, always under 10% on these types of projects. And we sprayed using the same tip, a 4 out of a cap spray, and it worked pretty well. You know, other than that, really, I'm gonna still clean and degrease a new project that is recently painted or recently purchased, just because I want to make sure there's nothing on it. I'm just gonna use not a harsh degreaser, just simple green or something like that, as opposed to a product like M1. I would not use M1 on a new project. So Command is a urethane, like Emerald. It gets to a similar level of hardness. It works great in my opinion for most circumstances. It's got a great return to service time. Uh, Pretty much you can throw it in the back of your truck by the end of the day and move it without really having to worry about many problems. It cures faster, and so you don't have to worry about paint chipping. With Emerald Urethane, I always kind of have to worry that I'm going to bust a corner or something like that or scratch it. Command, I'm pretty certain that I can move it after a couple, you know, at least a few hours, preferably more. But also, the dry time is only an hour. The downside of that is that it doesn't quite level out as well as Emerald Urethane does. But with the exception of that, you know, it's got a lot of the positives of Emerald Urethane, but also not as many of the drawbacks. So I've got somebody helping me today, and we're just sanding everything now. And this is sanding the first coat of that command. It was definitely dry, definitely easily to move around. No concerns with that. Doesn't chalk up like primer completely, but it still was definitely ready to be sanded after a couple hours. I think we went to lunch and came back, and then we decided to put the last coat on. So whenever I'm painting, drawers especially, I do like to put a good bit of paint on them because, especially with these emerald well, this is not emerald urethane, but with the urethanes, they have a little bit better hang than lacquers. So what that means is that they cling to the surface a little bit better, and they don't tend to form heavy spots or run. Lacquers are very difficult to work with, in my opinion, no matter who you are. I mean, I think that almost anybody can get a run in a lacquer, and you know the the urethanes don't tend to do that as much, and you can put on a lot more paint without having to worry about any kind of like thickness, you know, maximum thickness deterrent or anything like that that's going to stop you from putting on a certain amount. It's a lot more beginner friendly, especially after you put a few drops of water in it. You get a similar look to a lacquer, but you know, you get a lot more user friendly and experience. So I'm spraying some of these spots like 2 or 3 times, and I probably wouldn't be doing that if I was using a lacquer, unless I had a lot of fans going on it, because I'd be worried about getting runs, especially with something like Chem Aqua. It's extremely thin. These paints, like I said, are a little bit thicker and not as much to worry about. I do still try to do the curved and convex areas first. That way, whenever I go to putting on the flat paint, there's not already paint on those areas, and I'm free to kind of shoot different angles before I move on to the flat surfaces, and I put on a lot of paint there and have residual paint already on the curved surfaces whenever I go to try to get all the little angles in there. So now we're putting the hardware back in. It's got a nice kind of French provincial style gold leaf hardware. I really like them a lot. Just combined with the white and the hardware and everything, I think it really looks good to me. And my clients were happy with it. Although we did have one little incident. It was my fault. We had a little bit of masking that got stuck to part of the stain top, and whenever I took the masking off, it peeled some of the stain back. It was just one, spot, but fortunately, I was able to fix it to where it blended in much better. It did take a lot of work, but I really had great clients on this job, and thanks to them, and thank y'all for watching, and hope to see you next time.